And I'm going to do this with you here. At some point in time, somebody made a copyright or a patent based on my vocals. I believe it happened before 2010. As a matter of fact, my understanding is that Halliburton had to pay out a very substantial lawsuit settlement around the time between 2006 to 2009. I believe they attempted to get away with saying that they had been compliant with the terms of the settlement by working out some form of alternative compensation, including alternative compensation that they intended to get credited as being meted out through involvement of people who worked as contractors or subcontractors through KBR. There was never any prior disclosure. I never consented, and I would never have accepted. This was before the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in General Dynamics versus United States. Just so you know. There's no just cause claim for any of the things that they've done with any of my vocal files. If it has anything to do with any sort of transnational communications involving the international telecommunications networks, including in places where there would have been a necessary relay because of their particular network at the time, and or including in the use of a third-party long-distance provider, including one that would have a specific PIN number associated with any of the accounts that were used to finance or pay for the fees associated with the transmission internationally. I never would have agreed. I was never informed ahead of time, and it is not covered, and it never was. That's why I just did that, because sometimes when I go to do these voice recordings or I go to do things on video, somebody just automatically turns off the voice file on my computer. It's been happening for several months. Sometimes they've even hacked into my computer and taken things I've done and they've changed it. Sometimes they do it simultaneously. I've seen it, how I will record something and then as it uploads, they'll change a specific word or a specific phrase. Usually I indicate it, not all the time. In the last week, there have been 2 instances where they real-time spliced in a reference to another location than the one I actually said as it was uploading. I've kept track of that on my own, but I've not provided public notification. Why? Because we are in the situation we are in. Now, I want to reference something about a process I was not personally a part of, but which other people used me in connection with. In the autumn of 2015, I had just returned from Honduras after teaching in a private school. I wrote an article that was intended to be an article for official publication concerning my understanding of the education system in Honduras and how it compared with things that were ongoing in the United States, including changes to immigration policy. It discussed matters related to the private system versus the public system, compared it with matters in the United States concerning public school versus private schools. And it also talked about the implications regarding immigration, specifically that primary school education was connected to higher education and the role that higher education played when it came to the United States' immigration policy. This was hopefully a manner in which to discuss the sorts of considerations that go into what allows for somebody to get a visa to work in the United States, what's considered to be a skill that is unique and hence would qualify somebody for a work visa, versus other matters in which people attempt to seek to immigrate to the United States and hopefully get to a point where we are honestly and openly discussing the racism that comes with selection of those that are determined to have the kind of work that is acknowledged as being necessary for the American economy, and those who are not. And so their work contributions end up being categorized as in some manner criminal or associated with crime. Contrast that with the fact that those who are able to get a job and have it identified as work that's important for the American economy, what is the role they play in covering up for other crime within the United States? Of course, there are interstate implications as well. But in the course of attempting to get feedback from the article, I referred it to people both in Honduras and the United States. The anticipation was to have them read it beforehand, give me commentary, peer critique, because it was a provocative subject. I did not send the article to any publication for publication, but I did contact a specific publication for a request that they consider the synopsis I provided them about the article, and then let me know what the next step would be in order to have it considered for publication. They responded. The person who responded identified herself only as Cherokee. Cherokee. I did not know at the time that I submitted that article for publication, or submitted a request for consideration of publication of that article with the New Yorker magazine, that the specific date was around the time and coming close to what was going to be the anniversary of a constitutional convention involving the Cherokee nations. I did not know that at the time. I do know they said, well, we don't consider that to be appropriate for publication here. But somebody accessed that article and used it for underwriting on large-scale securities that have been pending ever since. I've tracked it. It's part of the reason that I'm allowed to be maintained in this state of kidnapping, because they want me to concede that somehow what they did instead was legitimate because it's for the children, and it's not. I believe part of what has been revealed is that there has been a conspiracy more than 150 years old that used children that were a part of alleged Christian organizations providing assistance for public education to be made available for waivers of taxation through alleged Christian charities. And that part of this had to do with hypersexualization and defamation of indigenous sexuality, which also includes the connection that indigenous people have to the actual land. And this is part of how they were able to justify exploiting indigenous children and indigenous peoples for weapons development. Literally. The problem is, at some point, somebody who thought they had authority in some manner, they made some deals and they alleged to speak on behalf of whole groups of people. I don't know all the details of that. I know what I would personally have done. I know the communities who have allowed themselves in the past to be associated with me would have chosen to do. But those and me, where are we? I did not realize until after I had submitted my case for review before the Southern District of Texas, U.S. District Court here, that there was the 150th anniversary of elements of the Cherokee Constitution that had to do specifically with education. Apparently there was a big rift. There was a historian. His last name was Starr, S-T-A-R-R, who was present at the actual constitutional conventions. The nations were not united. There was great controversy. It's actually one of the very important and exciting parts of constitutional history overall. I mean, it's not acknowledged as such. Even as Americans, we are not supposed to know that this is our history. If we're within a constitutional system and within the United States, there are other autonomous peoples engaging in a constitutional process. Does it not behoove us to understand what was going on in their consideration of accommodating and or resisting the imposition of a constitutional system? You see, this is what got me kicked out of Honduras. It was the American Constitution. It was the Constitution of the United States of America that literally got me banned. When I tried to resubmit my case, it was automatically assigned to a judge whose last name is S-T-A-R-R. But somebody had already laid a first claim, didn't they? The problem is, it wasn't the Starr report. It was a case from Oklahoma that I contend was used in connection with underwriting on securities associated with a Permian Basin conference that happened exactly or around 6 months before the United States invaded Iraq. Now, on the anniversary of that very conference, I contacted who was supposed to be the legal counsel for that conference. What did they say? We can't help you. Yeah, we don't know who to talk to either. Not true. None of it's been true. So you're going to have to make a choice. If you decided to make me not eligible for consideration of due process because you decided to make me your token Indian, you need to understand my Indian would be a constitutionalist as well. You made a very, very grave mistake in that regard. And now we are where we are. In the summer of 2019, a very tragic event occurred. There was a shooting in a parking lot outside a Walmart here in Texas. Not only was it in Texas, but it was in the hometown of a former senatorial candidate. Now, he did not win the 2018 election, but he was also a congressman. This shooting in the parking lot was very profound. I remember seeing him within 24 hours of the event. I remember seeing a press conference with him. The way he responded, the way his body responded, the sound of his voice. I know he was in pain, physical pain. It happened on his hometown, on his land, on his people's land. He was their representative. And they did that. But within 24 hours of that event, there was another shooting in Ohio. Now, presumably, there was some sort of late night car rally. And in the course of this late night car rally, which itself is illegal, somebody showed up, opened fire. Both events happened within 24 hours of each other over a weekend. There was plenty of forewarning that something was happening. There was a very specific implication in terms of the number of people that were reported as first shot and then murdered. As a matter of fact, it was so profound and so precise that I ended up contacting the very bank I understood financed it. They never got back to me. And less than 24 hours after that, there was the shooting in Ohio. Now, the state of Ohio is reputed to be the location, or the birth location, of more presidents than any other state. But it's also where my sister lives right now, with her children, some of whom are adults, her grandchildren. I felt that too. Same thing just happened. Now, those people died. They were reported as casualties, actual deaths. But the same thing just happened last night. I told you earlier this week they were planning a terrorist attack. I told you earlier this week that they were manipulating crimes they had set up in accordance with the 65th anniversary. That is today. Those injured people going through hospitals in both Chicago and Austin was 100% premeditated. Now, if you want to try to do some blood quanta shit, you need to get the fuck out of this country. You need to get out of this hemisphere. There's no place for that. See, presumably, there was a problem that required a global mobilization to shut down a paradigm that was strategically exterminating groups of people based upon some presumption of being able to identify their legacy or heritage by a blood test or a consideration of percentages associated with their blood. We've already evolved. We've already devolved beyond a consideration of allowing for how someone's actual blood, as analyzed through some pseudo-scientific process, actually qualifies as a value. We're not talking about healing diseases. We're not talking about providing life-supporting connections or energy or love. We're not talking about any of these things. What we're talking about is an arbitrary justification for selectively targeting particular genotypes in order to dispossess them of both their physical, cultural, and ancestral legacies, to offset crimes that have been promulgated by people that like to keep themselves exclusive. There's no more justification for a global replication of the policy of restrictive covenants that was used to oppress African American peoples in urban centers throughout this country for the last 100 years or more than there is for making justifications that somebody's quantum of blood justifies them for consideration as a tax waiver, including for some Christian charity. That's what they did. Now we're in a very serious situation here. We're in a very, very serious situation here. It behooves somebody to respond with the gravitas that is required. There's somebody to understand the gravity of what has fallen on us and stand the fuck up. We don't have time for you to talk about mental illness or distress. Their drugs are being used to enslave us. Do you understand? They're using drugs to enslave us.